Good evening. So tonight I'm going to be finishing up. Sadly, I didn't know I was quite this close, but I'm almost at the end. So we're going to be finishing up uh, The Importance of Being Ernest, the life of actor Jim Varney. It's been a good read. I've really enjoyed it. So if you've missed the first 13 parts, because this is part 14, then just go back to the beginning. I still haven't made a playlist, I don't guess. I probably ought to do that. But, I mean, still, you can see it by the thumbnail anyhow, until I do that. Okay, so we're on chapter 24. It's called Slinky Dog. In 1991, Pixar signed a three-picture movie deal with Disney. The company had morphed over many years from a computer hardware company to one now focused on animation. Pixar's Academy Award-winning animated shorts were so impressive and cutting edge that it seemed inevitable a major motion picture would someday feature their exciting new animation process. In addition to shorts, Pixar had also found some success producing animated commercials for companies such as Tropicana and Lifesavers. The first feature-length movie that Pixar made was Toy Story, and Jim was fortunate to be offered a role. Despite the broken partnership with Carden and Cherry, Disney saw Jim's potential for playing something besides Ernest. A few years prior, Disney had been working with Beetle Bailey creator Mort Walker to develop a live-action movie version of his famous comic strip character. The two sides had come close to working out a deal until Walker balked at Disney's insistence on Jim playing Beetle. Walker appeared to be one more in a growing list of people who could not envision Jim playing anything other than an Ernest-type character. But with Toy Story, Disney, and perhaps Pixar too, showed they felt otherwise and wanted him to voice the character of Slinky Dog. The Toy Story was for Pixar what Ernest Goes to Camp had been for Carden and Cherry. Little did Jim or anyone else know just how successful Toy Story would become, or what kind of impact it would have on animation. Jim spent the next 2 years making numerous trips from his home in Tennessee and Pixar's Bay Area studios to record dialogue for Slinky Dog. He described the process as one of the oddest in his film experience, much like putting a large puzzle together. Animators used the mannerisms of each actor to give each toy more human qualities. One coincidence was that at the time Jim's mother owned a miniature dachshund named Gretchen that looked identical to Slinky Dog. In a sense, voicing Slinky Dog brought Jim's career full circle. He had started out doing voice work on radio ads for John Cherry in the early 70s, and Jim's voice was now in the hands of animators translating it into the personality of the character. Decades of smoking had given Jim's voice a deep, raspy sound that provided well-worn southern warmth to the coil-bellied dog. But despite Jim's happiness at being part of Toy Story, tragedy was on the scene for him again. In August 1994, Jim's mother lost a 7-year battle with leukemia. Jim was able to visit her in the hospital in Lexington in the days before she died. At 45, he had now lost both parents and his oldest sister. Work, as always, was a salve to Jim's grief. He continued to stay busy by returning to Vancouver once again to shoot another Ernest film. It seemed fitting that being from Kentucky, Jim would someday portray a basketball star. In Slam Dunk Ernest, is a mall janitor trying to fit in with his basketball-playing coworkers. Things began to look up when he asked to join their City League team. Ernest soon receives a big helping hand with the Archangel of basketball, played by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, pays Ernest a visit and bestows upon him magical sneakers. Soon, Ernest has the ability to perform gravity-defying moves on and off the court. John Cherry provides his own comic relief with a cameo portraying a fan in the stands who creates a minor brawl over a spilled drink. Ernest's moves eventually propel his team to capture the City League title, earning them a chance to play against an actual NBA team. In addition to all the usual slapstick silliness, Cherry included a morality subplot as he had done with previous movies such as Camp and Christmas. Ernest teaches the impressionable young son of one of his co-workers that there is more to life than a pair of new basketball sneakers. Although Slam Dunk went straight to video, it satisfied hardcore Ernest fans. Apart from Toy Story, a few of Jim's next movies gave him the momentum he had built up from Beverly Hillbillies. The next non-Ernest movie in which Jim was cast was The Expert, an action flick filmed in Nashville. Action star and martial artist Jeff Speakman stars as a man out to avenge his sister's murder. Jim plays the role of his longtime friend, a weapons expert named Snake. Prolific crime author Max Allan Collins wrote the film's screenplay. His resume includes everything from comic strips to short stories. In 1998, he wrote the graphic novel Road to Perdition, which was made into a 2002 film by the same name, starring Tom Hanks and Paul Newman. When speaking of the role of the sadistic warden played by James Brolin in The Expert, Collins said he had originally written it with Rip Torn in mind. After seeing Jim audition for the role, Collins changed his mind. "I lobbied for him," Collins once said, "and when he didn't get the part, I wrote a new scene, a new character, Snake, especially for him as a cameo." Huh, that's kind of nice. Let me whip my whistle right fast. One highlight in the short list of Jim's mostly forgettable non-Ernest films of the mid-90s brought him back to Lexington. 100 Proof is based on the true story of two troubled women who together committed 5 murders in a single day in Lexington, Kentucky. Wow. First-time movie director Jeremy Horton used the 1986 murders as the inspiration for his fictionalized screenplay. He had become interested in the story after moving into an apartment building where one of the convicted murderers, Tina Hickley Powell, once lived. It wasn't so much the crime that intrigued Horton, but the thought of what possibly could have led 2 people to go on such a rampage. Once Horton had the financing in place, he began casting. He could rely on talented local theater actors he knew for many of the roles, but had specific people in mind for central characters. One wasn't an actor at all. Horton had convinced one of his idols, Southern novelist Larry Brown, to play a drug-dealing store owner. Horton tried to get such accomplished actors as Harry Dean Stanton, Emmett Walsh, and Dennis Hopper for the part of Ray's father. Ray is one of the 2 main female characters. When efforts fell through, Jim's name came to his mind. Horton had met Jim years earlier when Jim attended a stage production he had directed for the Studio Players in Lexington. Remembering how highly the Lexington theater community had spoken of Jim's acting, Horton contacted Jim's management and soon found out that Jim was interested. Even though Jim's character would appear in only one scene, those moments would play a large part in exposing the unrelenting despair that penetrated Ray's life. In October 1995, shooting started at some of the less appealing locales in Lexington in order to portray the gritty setting. Horton recalls Jim being the consummate professional. Jim had made sure that his performance captured the rhythm Horton intended. At one point, Horton left Jim and actor Pamela Stewart, who plays Ray, alone for about an hour to work on their scene. He says the two even came up with a backstory for their father-daughter relationship to help them get more into the heads of the characters. Jim also helped choreograph the brief physical confrontation that takes place between them. After finishing up work on 100 Proof, Jim continued accepting roles in non-Ernest films. In February 1996, he traveled to Quebec to shoot his comedy called Snowboard Academy. The movie stars Corey Haim and Bridget Nelson formed SCTV regular Joe Flaherty plays the owner of a ski resort whose two sons try to convince their father how to run the family business. At the time, snowboarding was still building its popularity. The movie does address in a comedic way the problem of snowboarders wanting to ride the ski slopes. Jim plays the part of Rudy James, a jack-of-all-trades maintenance man. Jim pulled from his real-life comedy club experiences and scenes where Rudy performs stand-up at the resort's clubhouse. Even though Jim isn't playing Ernest, his character displays many of the same slapstick antics. In Rudy's first scene, he gets tangled up in a phone cord, then attempts to use his hands to contain the flowing hot coffee from a malfunctioning coffee maker. Unfortunately, the movie flopped, and even inhabiting for many years the bottom 100 list on the Internet Movie Database. As busy as Jim was accepting film roles for non-Ernest characters, he was still shooting commercials as everyone's favorite neighbor for clients such as Louisiana Gas Service. Jim told one Canadian reporter during this period that he planned to continue playing Ernest until I'm on crutches or too old to actually fall off a ladder. Hit my beer. Jim's next project was set for the spring. It was another independent film that, like 100 Proof, was far removed from Ernest and comedies altogether. The title, Blood, Friends, and Money, involves a group of horror movie buffs who gather one weekend to party and watch horror flicks. The film was the project of longtime Ernest assistant camera operator Armanda Costanza. She had worked on every movie project of Jim's, from Family Album to Scared Stupid. She was now trying her own hand at directing and hoped the film would be successful enough to fund future projects. Jim played the old mariner in a few scenes. I didn't know about that. Oh, I had some people. Sorry. Hello. The script was written by Tim Ormond, whose family was sometimes been referred to as Nashville's first family of film. Ormond's parents, Ron and June Carr Ormond, had been making independent B-movie exploitation films in Nashville since the 1960s. Some of the clips from those films were even used in Costanza's picture. Tim's mother, June Carr Ormond, was cast as a restaurant manager. Since Jim and the Ormond family had become synonymous with filmmaking in Nashville, it was fitting that they shared credits on a project. Around this time, Jim was branching out into computer software games. In the past, he had always talked about wanting to write stories in the spirit of the original English and Appalachian tales that center around a character named Jack. Jack and the Beanstalk being the most popular of these Jack tales. Jim never got around to writing any of his own Jack tales, but he did become involved in the production of a computer game for kids called Jack's Adventures Beyond the Beanstalk. Despite all the work Jim put into it, the game was never released. In the fall of 1996, Jim was on location in Denver for the children's comedy Three Ninjas High Noon at Mega Mountain. Jim was cast as Lothar Zug, his first villain since playing Ernest's evil twin, and Ernest goes to jail. The film, starring Hulk Hogan, I remember this movie. I saw it as a kid. I don't remember Ernest being in it. I don't remember the movie, but I mean, I remember I watched it. The film, starring Hulk Hogan as a retired TV action star turned superhero, failed at the box office like Snowboard Academy. It made the Internet Movie Database's bottom 100. But during this time, Jim did shine in a small screen hit. He guest starred in 2 episodes of Roseanne, playing Prince Carlos of Moldavia. The storyline involves Roseanne's sister Jackie falling for his character after he visits the diner where she and Roseanne work. The two enjoy a short-lived romance that includes a trip to New York and an eclectic family gathering at Roseanne's house. More good fortune fell upon Jim when 100 Proof was selected for the Sundance Film Festival in January 1997. Director Jeremy Horton had hoped that Jim would attend and join other cast members in promoting the film. Despite all the obvious reasons for Jim to want to be there, including a chance to rub elbows with Hollywood executives, he decided to participate in the Buckmaster's Whitetail Classic with his friends in Alabama. Well, there you go. As committed as Jim was to selling hundreds of products as Ernest, he wasn't always as dedicated when it came to selling himself. He lost a major opportunity to capitalize on his small but memorable performance in 100 Proof and his ability to truly play dramatic roles. After its screening at Sundance, 100 Proof went on to receive positive reviews in such publications as the New York Times. Joe Layden of Variety wrote, but even Stewart and Belondo are briefly overshadowed by Jim Varney's ferociously nasty cameo as Ray's sleazy father. It's hard to believe this is the same guy who gained fame as the doltish Ernest P. Worrell in TV commercials and low-budget comedies. More villainous character roles may be in his future. The film's producer, George Marinville, told the press how pleased he was with Horton's directing efforts, comparing the film to others in the same genre, such as Badlands and In Cold Blood. In January 1998, the movie was given a special premiere at the historic Kentucky Theater in downtown Lexington. Jim traveled to Lexington to join his family in attending the event. Although his family had always enjoyed Ernest as much as Jim's biggest fans, they were excited about Jim taking on the type of role he had wanted to for so long. But apart from 100 Proof, few of the movies Jim starred in after Hillbillies brought box office or critical success. That's in large part why he returned once again to making movies as Ernest. A few years earlier, when promoting Rides Again, Jim speculated on how many years of Ernest he might have left. I'm gonna let it kind of die a natural death, I think, he said. The fact that the movies were now going straight to video reflected that Ernest was already living on borrowed time. The next 2 Ernest movies took the film crew all the way to South Africa. The first, Ernest Goes to Africa, involves Ernest making a long-distance trip to rescue a kidnapped girlfriend to whom he unknowingly has given stolen diamonds. The second film, Ernest in the Army, was shot in Cape Town. It would be the 9th and final Ernest movie. In addition to directing, John Cherry plays the part of Ernest's old friend, Sarge, who talks Ernest into joining the Army Reserves. After being promised that the reserves would be easy, Ernest is shipped out for combat and calamity ensues. During the shoot, Cherry noticed how his normally energetic star was having a particular difficult time handling some of the hilly terrain. At the time, no one was aware of the extent to which Jim's health had begun to deteriorate. In 1998, Jim was also writing country music and collaborating with 2 talented musician friends, Bobby Boyd had lived with Jim for a short time in the 90s. After starting out in a country band called the Castaways, Boyd moved into songwriting, doing extremely well. Conway Twitty, George Jones, and Jimmy Dean are just a few of the country artists who recorded his songs. His biggest success came from a song he co-wrote in the 80s called Two of a Kind, Working on a Full House. It later became a #1 hit for Garth Brooks. Boyd, Jim, and country singer Vern Gosdin gathered on Sunday mornings in Jim's kitchen, a place where Jim often found inspiration to write and play music. Gosdin, then in his mid-60s, had first achieved success in the 1960s, singing in a band with his brother Rex. He later began a solo career that brought him a long string of mainstream country hits in the 1980s, as well as the impressive nickname The Voice. In 1984, he landed his first #1 hit on the country chart with the song I Can Tell by the Way You Dance, You're Gonna Love Me Tonight. Gosdin was working on a new album and was excited about the melodies created during these sessions. One of the many songs the three worked on was called Maybe Then I'll Be Over You. The lyrics describe a man so wounded over a past relationship that he doesn't believe his heart will recover until he is 6 feet under. Gosdin recorded the song for his 1998 album, The Voice. Jim received a writing credit. Well, that's nice. The time at home was a nice break for Jim, who was still going as hard as ever. On the heels of the 2 Ernest movies he had just shot in South Africa, he was traveling to California to record dialogue for Toy Story 2 and reading over a number of scripts being sent his way. Oh, well, that's the end of chapter 24. All right, we got chapter 25. The end of a great adventure. Well, this is kind of a bummer because I know this is the last one. In the summer of 1998, Jim was in Los Angeles shooting another children's comedy movie. He was cast as small-time counterfeiter Carl Banks in Treehouse Hostage. In the movie, Carl manages to escape from jail but is soon strung up by a young boy's booby trap while cutting through backyards. When the boy and his friends discover that Carl is the escapee cops are looking for, they decide to keep him as their hostage. Apart from a few Ernest-type facial expressions and a scene where he appears in drag, Carl is probably the only movie role where Jim played a character straight. That is, in a way, closest to his true personality and mannerism. During the shooting, Jim began to experience severe coughing attacks. Before long, he was coughing up blood. He thought he may have contracted something in South Africa. After returning home from California, he had chest x-rays at a hospital in Nashville. The news was not good. A mass was found in his lungs, and the doctor wanted Jim to have a bronchoscopy, where a piece of the mass is removed for testing. As soon as he got the results, Jim called his sister Jake, a nurse, to find out just how worried he should be. He knew her schedule, and the phone rang just as she got home from work. Jake was an operating room nurse at the time, and he had actually assisted in bronchoscopies. Jim filled her in, and Jake outlined what was involved, including the need to be put under anesthesia. Jake could tell Jim was worried. Jake called Sandy soon after, and they both realized that their brother probably had lung cancer. As soon as the probable diagnosis was, it was something for which they had been preparing. Jake and Sandy had observed a noticeable change in Jim's appearance. The past few times they had seen him in person, He looked as if he had aged 10 years in the last two. Throw in the fact that Jim had been a lifelong smoker, and the conclusion was not a pretty one. No matter what the news was, they were going to do everything they could to get him through it. With the added reassurance he received from Jake, Jim proceeded with the bronchoscopy a few days after talking to her. The results of the biopsy confirmed everyone's worst fears. The mass was a malignant tumor. Doctors wanted to schedule surgery as soon as possible to remove it. Knowing that the recovery time would be lengthy, Jim quickly began tying up loose ends. One was an exciting new project with Billy Bob Thornton. Jim's last on-screen performance was in Daddy and Them, directed and written by Thornton. The southern-flavored comedy is set in Arkansas and tells the story of a struggling musician named Claude Thornton, his wife, Ruby, Laura Dern, and the episode that drives their already dysfunctional family into chaos. Claude's Uncle Hazel, played by Jim, is arrested and jailed in Little Rock for assaulting a man with an iron doorstop. Claude and Ruby go to Little Rock to rally around him and the rest of the family while helping to hire a defense team. The only problem is the family doesn't get along any better than Claude and Robbie do. By now, Thornton and Jim had been friends for a decade. Even though their busy careers kept them from getting together much, they kept in touch by phone, with Jim often entertaining Thornton for hours. Along with the fact that they both loved to act and sing, they were also unapologetic Southerners who loved the humor that came with the stereotypes of the region. Thornton had admitted borrowing phrases of Jim's throughout the years, including "How about you?" and "Get you and knock off that steak." Thornton used to stay at Jim's house every so often. He recalled once how during a visit he saw Jim's DeLorean up on blocks in the front yard. That prompted a warning from Thornton: never give a hillbilly money. With his recent diagnosis, Jim likely knew Daddy and Them could be his last movie. Perhaps his optimistic side hoped to use the performance to break away from Ernest for good. Thornton was giving Jim a shot at the type of dramatic movie role he had been yearning for since he had first come to Los Angeles. Not even cancer was going to stop Jim from pursuing his opportunity. Thornton began, being the good friend he was, moved production around to allow Jim to film his scenes before his surgery. In addition to Dern, the all-star cast includes such actors as Jamie Lee Curtis and Ben Affleck. The unfortunate thing is that Jim's most memorable scene actually ended up on the cutting room floor. It has been included deservedly in the deleted scenes of the DVD release. In the scene, Jim barges into the house during a family meal. He immediately begins to loudly lecture everyone sitting at the table on how poorly they and other family members have been treating each other. With every word, he becomes increasingly enraged until he is worked up into such a fury that he begins to smash furniture in an adjacent room. Never had Jim shown such a raw emotion on screen. It must have taken every ounce of his weakened body to bring forth the passion and physicality the scene required. He dug deep. Perhaps his performance was fueled by the years of being typecast, the elusive roles on Broadway, bad Ernest movie reviews, and now the unfairness of a cancer diagnosis. If this were to be his final act, to borrow a phrase from his father's world of boxing, he was determined to go down swinging. Paint this beard. Daddy and Them producer Bruce Heller spoke highly of Jim. It's amazing that what Jim does in the film. It's something different than you've ever seen from him before. He's got the dramatic center of the movie. Just a few days after filming his scenes, Jim was back in Nashville undergoing a major operation. A large tumor piercing his heart was removed, along with almost 2/3 of his right lung. Jim's sisters traveled down from Lexington to visit him, as did a nephew, Brad Kelly, the son of Jim's late sister, Jo Gale. They were relieved the surgery was a success and hopefully the cancer would not return. Jim's sense of humor gave them added confidence that he would weather the storm. Right before the surgery, Jim had told his doctors that if they pull him through, he would give them a handsome tip. In no time, Jim was using the missing portion of his lung as the butt of his one lung jokes. He found out his old friend Johnny Cash was staying in a nearby Nashville hospital undergoing treatment for pneumonia. He called Cash's room and began joking with him. There you go, bragging about having some double pneumonia when you know the best I can do is single pneumonia. He also said one advantage to having the extra space in his chest was that it might be a good place to carry a knife. Jim was curious about all the different machines he was wired to in the hospital bed. One, the pulse oximeter, measured the oxygen in the blood. Jake explained that a desirable reading ranged from 96 to 100%. Jim's reading was between 88 and 90. He admitted that it was better than most of his high school grades. During this time, a movie set to feature Jim called The Pirates of the Plain was announced. John Cherry had written the screenplay and was set to direct. It was the first non-Ernest movie Cherry would direct since Dr. Otto. The movie is about an 8-year-old Nebraska farm boy who was befriended by a pirate, Jezebel Jim, after a storm creates a vortex in time, allowing the salty seas captain to be deposited into the future. Right before passing through time, Jack was being forced to walk the plank of his ship by his mutinous crew. Jack helps the boy find a treasure buried underneath the tool shed just before the rest of his crew arrive via another time vortex. Jack and the boys successfully fight off the crew, keeping the treasure out of their hands. The movie was scheduled to start shooting that fall in Cape Town, but Jim had to pull out because of his health problems. Tim Curry ended up playing Jezebel Jack. The movie has remained a never-ending source of confusion for Ernest fans. It somehow became news that a movie called Ernest the Pirate was nearing completion when Jim passed. That was not true. Online petitions have actually demanded Disney release Ernest the Pirate. Not only was cancer affecting Jim's health, it was having a major impact on his acting career. Luckily, he had already finished his voice work for Toy Story 2 and another animated Disney feature, Atlantis, The Lost Empire. Jim was the voice of the cook, Jebediah Allardyce Cookie Farnsworth. Never saw that one. Ever since the first Toy Story film, Jim had enjoyed a new niche in animated voice work. In 1997, he voiced a character named Walt Evergreen in an episode of Duckman, an animated sitcom on the USA Network that followed the adventures of a duck private detective. That same year, he portrayed Mr. Gus Holder in the animated Christmas film Annabelle's Wish, about a calf that aspires to be one of Santa's reindeer. Jim also voiced a carny named Cooter in the episode of The Simpsons in 1998. 5 years earlier, the show paid tribute to Jim in an episode where the Simpsons family heads out to see a fictional movie called Ernest Goes Somewhere Cheap. Meanwhile, Jim was still recovering from his surgery. Jim's sister, Jake and Sandy, continued to drive down from Lexington to his home in Tennessee to visit when they could. They would stay over for a night or two and fix some meals. Another family member who spent a great deal of time with Jim during his recovery was his niece, Andrea, Sandy's daughter. Andrea was 25 at the time. and able to take time off from her waitress job in Lexington to visit him. Andrea had also cooked for Jim and provided welcome company. Jim loved her stir fry with pineapple chunks. It was one of the few meals he would finish. During a few visits, Jim actually cooked for Andrea, once making his chili with chocolate syrup. She found it quite good. When Andrea stayed at Jim's, she would fix him a pot of coffee in the morning. He wasn't much for breakfast, but usually drank most of the coffee. He occasionally talked about his dreams and tried to interpret them. Then they would hang out on the couch in his den for much of the day and talk. They discussed such things as history, jewelry, politics, and Jim's career. Andrea remembers him talking about the Carter family album he had played on with his dulcimer. Jim was not into technology and told Andrea he thought he wasn't tech savvy enough for the 21st century. He did not own a computer and had shelves full of VHS movies that he enjoyed watching on his VCR. Andrea remembers a conversation where Jim said he thought children were not as creative as when he was young. He blamed technology. But remember, this was in 1999, years before such developments as the iPhone and Facebook. Oh, I know it. Around March 1999, Jim suffered a seizure, and it turned out the cancer had spread to his brain. Oh, good Lord. After receiving radiation, he'd lost most of his hair. He decided he might as well have the rest shaved. Ever the comedian, he talked about how much he enjoyed his Mr. Clean look. Andrea remembers Jim calling himself Yule Bummer. Oh, that sucks. Sandy recalls how his bald head made his eyes look electric and intensely blue. Andrea also remembers her visits to the hospital and the positive outlook that carried Jim through some of his darkest periods. In the 18 months of Jim's illness, he was hospitalized several times. He had pneumonia and a major seizure. I would sit up in his room the entire time he was there. He liked to watch the national news. He referred to it as eye dope. It made him fall asleep. He chewed Nicorette like crazy, chewed twice the amount recommended. A total slave to the nicotine. He didn't want to be left alone in the hospital for a minute while he was there. So I stayed. When he had the seizure, he couldn't talk for a few days. He had to write everything left-handed. He got so frustrated so easily, he really had little patience. It was frustrating for me, too. I wanted so bad to understand him. We got so close, though, I could almost read his mind. He never acted the victim of his disease. I think deep down he knew he was going to lose. But he stayed so positive that he was going to beat it. He was a true inspiration. He absolutely never thought smoking would kill him. He said he always thought it would be the alcohol. Jim was religious. He read the Bible many times during the last year of his life. He told me he grasped much of it. He never lost his creativity, his sense of humor, or his hope. Andrea is my sister, and I was able to accompany her on one of her visits to Jim's house in September 1999. I was 27 years old at the time. We arrived around dinner time, and we all quickly made ourselves comfortable on the couches in his den. I cannot recall what we began talking about, or to be more specific, what Jim began talking about. What I do remember is that I had a front row seat to a 12-hour one-man show. Aside from taking a few minutes to eat Andrea's stir-fry, Jim touched on many things, including countless stories of his past. Andrea hung in there for the first few hours, and then it was just me, just my uncle and me. The conversation took us from Bowie knives to sword fight demonstrations using a wiffle ball bat to recollections of Lafayette High School. At one point, we moved into the kitchen. Jim retrieved a large bullet from a kitchen drawer and began a lesson on its uses. If only I had known the treat I was going to be in for that night, I would have brought along a tape recorder or a video camera. Jim gave the last major interview of his life in November 1999 with Beverly Keel of the alternative weekly Nashville scene. She sat down with him in his home. During the conversation, Jim showed himself in a way that he had rarely done before. He admitted self-medicating for years with alcohol to deal with his lifelong struggle with depression, said Jim. But that wears off in a few hours, and you're back to square one again. I didn't know that there weren't super highs and lows in everybody's life. He even admitted to believing his depression was a contributing factor to his failed marriage with his first wife, Jackie. As usual, Jim injected humor when speaking of the pressure to be funny in a crowd where he was almost always the center of attention. He joked about how he often wished during those times he could take a rain check. We'll do lunch, a very depressing lunch. Then he talked about how he had visited a psychiatrist 3 years earlier who had prescribed Wellbutrin. After taking it, he admitted, I found out what normalcy was. One of the many things that kept Jim going during the trials of his illness was his excitement over the upcoming release of Daddy and Them. Its original release date had been scheduled for December 1999, just a month after Toy Story 2. His career was still very much on his mind, and he couldn't wait to get back to work. He told his sisters to make sure not to tell anyone he was sick. He was afraid that it might cause him to get overlooked for future roles. On November 13, 1999, Jim had regained enough strength to attend the premiere of Toy Story 2 at the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood, the site of the first Toy Story premiere 4 years earlier. This time, however, the man walked that same red carpet looked much different. The cancer medication caused swelling in Jim's face, a contrast to his frail frame. His cheeks were fuller and his complexion appeared smooth and pale, making his blue eyes more noticeable. Having lost all his hair, he was now sporting a goatee that was almost completely gray, but he didn't let his looks affect his unique sense of style. Wearing a dark green silk shirt, stylish black fedora, and dangling gold earring, he conveyed the message that he was still the same unconventional Jim. Just a month earlier in Nashville, Jim had received a special tribute at the Nashville Filmmakers Conference. Now, this big Hollywood premiere was icing on the cake. Janie and his attorney, Hoop Gibson, helped Jim walk through the photographers and crowds of onlookers as he made his way into the theater. Up until that point, Jim had done a good job on keeping his battle with cancer concealed. But with so many media outlets in attendance, his appearance quickly brought up questions about his health. Following the event, news outlets reported on Jim's battle with cancer and what Jim had described to them as an encouraging prognosis. A few months later, I drove my mother, Sandy, down to see Jim, and it was February 9th, 2000. We arrived in the early evening, and right away I could tell things were very different than the last time I had visited the previous fall. The hospital bed had been set up in his living room. I could not believe how frail Jim was. It was obvious that he did not have much time. When my mother walked up with me to his bedside, she said, "Look who I brought here with me. It's Mistake," referring to the dim-witted son of his Lloyd Worrell character. I managed to smile as I tried to remain as calm and collected as my mother. It seems very much a Varney trait to find humor during the most trying moments. The hospice nurse came and went, and we all went to sleep. My mom checked on Jim throughout the night. Jim wasn't talking much, but he did manage at one point to ask my mother if the window was open by his bed. She told him it was. She told him it was. Hours later, as we all slept, Jim passed on. My mother tried to make sense of his question about the window in the days that followed, and she wondered if he was preparing his spirit to depart the house. About 100 people attended Jim's funeral in Lexington. Many were close friends and family members. Country singer Vern Gosdin came up from Tennessee and sang Amazing Grace during the service. Jim's cousin, Ed McCord, spoke eloquently about his memories of Jim. He closed by saying, "Jim ran too fast and got there too soon." A public memorial was held for Jim at the War Memorial Auditorium in Nashville on February 16, 2000. Many of his close friends and family, including myself, also gathered there to share stories and listen to touching performances of some of his favorite songs, such as The Old Rugged Cross. One of the people who spoke that day was Dan Butler, a good friend of Jim's and a longtime Ernest writer. It is perhaps Butler's speech more than anything that has inspired and challenged me to do the best job possible in writing this biography. The speech was as moving as it was funny. I have watched it many times in the videotape I made that day. Here are selective excerpts. I was one of the guys who wrote for Jim, and I went on the state fair circuit with him. And late one night, 8 years ago, in a room at the Ramada Inn in Springfield, Illinois, Jim made me swear that whichever one of us was still standing, survivor, would publicly, at the other one's funeral, confess that together Jim and I, on the movie sets, out on location, plotted the murders of several caterers. Much applause. Woo! It was us. It was us. I just want to give you snapshots of one day on the road with Jim Varney at a state fair. Number one, you're on the airplane, and the stewardess says, "No, you can't be that Ernest guy. He's real stupid." I saw 20 different comebacks going through Jim's face, and he finally said, "Yeah, you're right." We got to the airport in Minneapolis, and a 60-year-old African-American shoeshine guy screams out from across the airport, "Ernest, my man, get over here." Now Jim looked more unearnest than I had ever seen him look. He had an earring, long suede coat, and an Armani suit, and this guy recognized him, and had to talk to Jim and get his autograph. And we're just in the airport, right? Now we're in a parade in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Jim's sitting up in the back of his convertible, and I'm sitting down in front. And a woman breaks through the barricade and runs up to the car with a baby outstretched and says, "Ernest, kiss my baby." He takes the baby, looks down at me, and said, "I'm kissing her baby. What a wonderful way of telling her how much I love her. And we ain't halfway through the day yet." And then another woman ran up and said, Ernest, I'm 42 and I'm just divorced. Will you marry me?" Jim said, "I'm not having her baby." After the show, Jim sits there and signs probably 600 autographs and takes like 600 photos. It was amazing. I'm just worn out. And we go back to this Ramada Inn, and the phone rings in my room. And it's Jim, and he's had about 2 pounds of chocolate, some coffee, and he wants to work on a sequel to Hamlet. Now, first thing I said to Jim was, "In Hamlet, everybody died, buddy." And he said, "No, Mr. Butler, there was an antidote." And I mean, in that Ramada Inn room, this guy had written the most beautiful soliloquies and did them, and it was unbelievable, and it went on all night. Then there was a day in my life, I don't know about you, but if you can remember one day in your life where you laughed more than any other, and I can tell you to the minute, it was sitting in the conference room at Cardin and Cherry before the movie. I think it was Scared Stupid, sitting with John Cherry and Jim. Somehow Botswana came up, and as it will in conversation, and Jim was he went off. The next thing I knew, Jim was the only lumberjack in Botswana. We were just laughing until we cried. And he was just going off. After 45 minutes, you think Botswana's going to get real old, right? I went to the restroom and came back and I said, all right, I'm not going to laugh anymore. You know, I got work to do. And I went back in there and he said, man, there ain't no trees in Botswana. I should have known. I'm the only lumberjack in Botswana. I should have worked I haven't worked in 32 years. And then he starts off on the popsicles. We don't have the little wooden sticks for the popsicles. We have little steel rods because there ain't no trees. And the children's tongues adhere to the little steel rods because they're so cold. My head hurt. It went on for 5 hours. He taught me to say area rug without closing my mouth. He taught me all sorts of stuff. But I tell you, the one day that came back to me, and that was 16 years ago, I got to sit in on maybe 2 Ernest writing sessions. I was a junior member of Glenn, Leisure, and Gill, Ernest writers for Card and Cherry. And I've been in like 2 sessions, and I hadn't written squat. I had contributed one phrase that I stole from my father-in-law in Oklahoma, which was "Golly Bob, howdy." And I had met Jim one time on the Ernest set. I had greatly embellished my role to my family and my in-laws. I was big time. I was a writer for Ernest. Well, 2 weeks later, my family goes out to Oklahoma City to visit my mother and father-in-law, who always says "Golly Bob, howdy" to me when I told him how much I was paid for something. "Golly Bob, howdy." And there he was, and he said, "I want you to introduce me to your old buddy Ernest." And I said, "Oh, no problem. Next time you come to Nashville, I'll introduce you." And he said, "No, in 2 hours I'm going to be down here at Brahms doing a personal appearance." And I said, "Really? Right here in Oklahoma City?" I didn't know he was coming to town. And man, I'm sweating bullets for 2 hours thinking, gosh, man, he isn't going to know me. He didn't even know who I was when I met him on the set. And, oh man, I was dying. So we get in the car and we go down, and there was 500 people at this Brahms, and the line's going all the way around the street. And I said, "Oh, it's too crowded. I'll get you an autograph back in Nashville." And he said, No, I'm meeting Ernest, buddy. Come on. He'll recognize you, and we'll get through this line in no time. We get in that line, and we're way back in the back. And the producer, Lynn Johnson, sees me, and Jim sees me, and she whispers in Jim's ear. Jim gets up and yells, "Mr. Butler, what are you doing in Oklahoma City? Get your butt up here." And he brings me up there with my son and my father-in-law, and I said, "Hey, man, this is the guy that said 'Golly Bob, howdy.'" And Jim said, "Man, that's my favorite phrase, and Ernest is always going to say that, and you're the guy." My father-in-law just glowed, and he talked about that day till the day he died. And Jim saved my ass that day. He didn't just save my ass, buddy. He made me think I was something special. Next thing I knew, I was telling my father-in-law, this was 1984, "Oh yeah, Butler here's going to write movies for Disney. We're going to be big Hollywood stars." And before that, my father-in-law had thought I was a bum. But not after that day. I saw Jim do that, make people feel special. It didn't matter if you were a plumber, a truck driver, or a purity driver. He had that ability, man, to make you think you were something. He made me laugh more than any other person in my whole life. And I was the one that was supposed to be writing funny stuff for him. And I know God prepared a room for Jim, and I'll bet you he's got a real fine area rug. Author's note. Here, Butler said area rug without closing his mouth. Area rug. Jim's attorney, Hoot Gibson, also spoke at the memorial. Gibson mentioned their recent trip to the Toy Story 2 premiere in Hollywood. He described how he had made their way through the crowds into the theater and how Jim was greeted by celebrities and big names in the industry, including Disney CEO Michael Eisner. The two eventually found their seats as the lights dimmed and the curtains were about to go up. Jim leaned over to Gibson. Hoot, Jim said. It's been a great adventure. Well, it's a bummer I'm at the end of the book, but golly Bob howdy, I really do enjoy me some Ernest. I love me some Ernest. I appreciate Justin Lloyd for writing it and giving us such a you know, candid look at his life and everything. So, all right, well, uh, the next live stream I do, I'm gonna leave it to be a surprise. But next live stream, I got a new book. All right, take care, y'all.